To get into our study of the holidays, the first thing we have to talk about, and the first concept to talk about, is Torah time. Because time is perceived of differently in the Torah in the way that it is, I think, in our normal everyday experience. Time, in the way it's viewed by the Torah, is more like a series of interlocking rings. You have many different cycles that are going on all at the same time. There are many different years demarcating different events, different significances that are all interlocking and rolling with each other. It's almost like you have different songs playing and different tempos going at the same time. For example, the Mishnah tells us in Tractate Rosh Hashanah, which discusses most of the calendar, that there isn't just one Rosh Hashanah. We tend to think of there being one Rosh Hashanah, the big Rosh Hashanah. It actually says there's several Rosh Hashanahs. We have a commandment that's given specifically to Jews that the holidays have to occur in their seasons, meaning that Passover must fall out in the spring, that Shavuot must fall out in the summer, that Rosh Hashanah must fall out in the fall. We have to resolve the lunar calendar of the Torah against the solar calendar. Nisan being the month in which the secular calendar begins, and Tishrei being the month that counts the holy calendar, the calendar of holidays and mitzvah observance. The relationship in Nisan and Tishrei is basically a sabbatical relationship. Tishrei is the Sabbath of the months, counting from Nisan. So you see here that even the cycle of years, just as Hashem sanctified the seventh day, also the cycle of counting years in the calendar, the cycle for the mitzvos and the holidays, the holy cycle, has a sabbatical relationship with the secular month cycle. Secular cycle goes from Nisan to Nisan. You offset that in the seventh month, you go from Tishrei to Tishrei. So they have a sabbatical relationship. And this sabbatical relationship between the secular and the holy that we see in the days of the week, we see this in a larger scale in the relationship between the calendar as a whole. A lot of the holidays on the Jewish calendar have a specific historical meaning for the Jewish people that's not relevant to anyone else. But then they have a global meaning for the whole universe, for the whole world. The mission of the Noahide community is to look for that global meaning. Someone who is a Noahide wants to connect with Sukkot, and they want to connect with Passover. They want to connect with Passover as the liberation from Egypt, and they want to connect with Sukkot as commemorating the clouds. Then you're trying to find connection with something that comes out of the uniquely Jewish historical experience. And it's actually ignoring the bigger picture. We have to understand that Noahides have no obligation to observe any of the Torah's festivals, even those that have universal relevance. They're nowhere in the Torah where it says Noahides must observe any particular festival. Nevertheless, they have importance and they have relevance, and it compels that we must acknowledge them somehow. The Noahide connection to these holidays is about the big picture. So a Noahide only receives merit and praise for seeking connection to these festivals, but he's not punished for it. So if you meet someone who's a Noahide who says, I don't want to do anything to commemorate these, you can't fault him. He's within his rights to do it. But a Noahide who does understand the deeper meaning of these festivals and their relevance to the world receives a lot of praise and receives a lot of merit for it. If there were practices, Noahide practices or prayers associated with the Torah's festivals and with their universal meaning, we don't know what they are anymore. And you might ask, well, why aren't they recorded anywhere? Again, there wasn't an obligation to observe them. Therefore, it's not discussed in the Talmud or any of the literature. The Torah literature deals primarily with obligation. The holidays that are decreed by the Torah, almost all of them have a dual level of meaning. So we're going to be looking at the holidays, trying to tease apart what aspects are for the whole world and which were sort of within that sphere of the Jewish experience. Take a look at the verse here from Exodus. It says, And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt and said, This month shall be to you the beginning of months. It shall be the first of the month of the year for you. It establishes for us Nisan as the first month. That's month one, which means that Passover is the first festival. So let's go back to our source Mishnah, so the redacting of the oral law that talks about this holiday, to see how it's explained. Mishnah tells us, and I have the Mishnah quoted here, it's at the very beginning of Rosh Hashanah. The Mishnah says, there are 4 Rosh Hashanahs. There's the first of Nisan, which is the new year for kings and festivals. So Nisan is the first month on the Hebrew calendar. The Mishnah says the following. At 4 junctures, the world is judged. On Passover for grain, on Shavuot for fruits, on Rosh Hashanah, all pass before him like sheep of the flock, as it is written, quote, He forms their hearts as one, He understands all of their deeds, end quote. The Mishnah there is bringing from the Psalms in chapter 33. Lastly, on Sukkot, the world is judged for water. In general, rabbinic decrees are not really relevant. Rabbinic decrees for Jews really have very little relevance to Noahites because the rabbis didn't really have authority over the non-Jews. I'm not going to tell you, this is an absolute must. This is what Noahites must do. I'll tell you where the boundaries are that can't be crossed, but I'm not going to tell you what you must do. I'll offer suggestions. Ultimately, however, I'm a Jew. I am grown up with and I'm soaked through and through with the history and the language associated with the historical experience of these holidays. The relevance of these holidays to you as a non-Jew is going to be very much dependent on your experience and how you perceive what the needs of the world are, what the needs of you are yourself, and what you see as the needs of your community and of your family. On Passover, the world, not the Jews, the world is judged for grain. It's on that day that Hashem looks at the world, the needs of individuals and the needs of nations, and he decides what the grain production is going to be between that time and the upcoming year. That's when our parnasa, our sustenance, food-wise, is determined both on our level and a national level. You want to end hunger in the world, everybody should pray for their allotted need on Passover. Pray for an end of hunger and for abundance any time of the year. But there's an especially propitious time to do it is on Passover, because that's when the world is assessed and when the world is judged on specifically that need. Our focus is really the national celebration of God rescuing us from the furnace that was Egypt. For the Noahide community, again, that narrow historical meaning is not as relevant as the more global meaning, which is it's a time of judgment for grain. It's a time when we should be concerned about the well-being of all people, that they have enough to eat. That's a universal concern. In the Jewish world, there's not a tremendous amount of discussion about this other than that we say a prayer for dew. So what does a prayer for dew have to do with the world being judged for grain? On the 15th of Nisan is sort of a dividing line agriculturally. At that point, most of the grain has already grown. Usually by that point in the growing season, it's already spurted, it's already grown. And it's starting to dry. That's when it's no longer small shoots. It's starting to turn brown and to dry and preparing for harvest. Rain that falls after the 15th of Nisan can actually cause the grain to rot. So we don't want too much rain after the 15th of Nisan because it's bad for the grain harvest. And that's true of many different grain harvests. So rather than tell God not to send rain, because rain's considered a blessing, we indirectly do it by praying for dew, that the amount of moisture should be constrained, so it would be just enough to sustain the crops without damaging the grain. So it says that on Passover, the world is judged for grain. So on Passover, Hashem decides the whole world's grain produce, which countries get more than another, while the liberation of Egypt, the Passover sacrifices, all those are commanded to the Jewish people. The whole concern for worldwide food, that's universal, that people should be fed. That all comes down to Passover. So on Passover, God decides the volume of grain production. We say grain production, we really mean all types of food. We really mean everything except for fruits and the produce of trees. So vegetables, all that, it all comes on Passover. Even today with hydroponic and technological farming, we're still dependent to a large degree on the weather, on the right climate, on the right amount of moisture to make that happen. So yes, our prayers are directly relevant to what God gives us. The month of Nisan falls out in the springtime, and that's always when you see the world coming out of its winter sleep. That's when everything starts to wake up. All it takes is one cold day or 1 week, and you lose your whole crop. It's all gone. The things that we understand and control, or that we believe we understand and control, are just as much in God's hands as the things that we don't understand. If a person has a tuna sandwich in the fridge and that's your lunch, you still have an obligation to pray to God to provide you with lunch. And when you take that tuna sandwich out, you still thank God for it, even though you're the one who made it. Because everything we have, whether it's within our control or not, still comes from Hashem. Anytime that we feel joy at nature or joy in the cycle of the world, that's really a time to give thanks to Hashem, who designed the world and created these cycles. It's a good idea, I think, to do projects, social projects around this time, run a food drive for people to help sort of raise awareness of hunger, to try to be mashpia toiv, to spread good in the world by arranging a food drive, working in a soup kitchen around this time. Anything to go and to help people to get fed, to make sure that other people have enough to eat. That's really the primary theme of the Passover season. One of the most important human beings to have probably lived in the past, I would say 100 years, is someone that almost no one has ever heard of. His name is Norman Borlaug. Borlaug passed away in 2009, and he was a Nobel laureate, and he was a biologist. He was an expert in plant genetics. He developed ways of breeding crops and improving agricultural techniques in Mexico, Pakistan, and in many, many third world countries. And he would develop innovative agricultural solutions for them. And he's credited with having saved over 1 billion people from starvation. There are countries where starvation was rife. Norman Borlaug set foot in those countries. Starvation dropped by 80%. What also happened, though, is also war. In a lot of those countries, all of a sudden, a lot of war stopped. He brought a lot of peace to those countries. He won the Nobel Peace Prize. He didn't win a science prize. He won the Nobel Peace Prize. Borlaug was only successful doing this because of Baruch Hu, because God happened to bless his effort and happened to provide the right things that he needed. And because God himself gave Norman Borlaug the wisdom and the insight to do this. So even Borlaug is a scientist who saved these billions of lives. Hashem saved those billions of lives. Hashem gave him the perfect storm of conditions. Everything comes from the Kadosh Baruch Hu, even Norman Borlaug. But we have to understand, Norman Borlaug, if anything, is a proof that you feed people, that's fundamental change. You provide for people's basic needs. Sam Kinison, I will say, once made a point in one of his stand-up routines. And I only know about this because someone else showed it to me. He made a point that was wonderful. He said, you want to end war, you want world peace, you feed people. That's the answer. You make sure every country has enough to eat. You make sure there are no children that are starving.
I'm like anybody else on the planet. I'm very moved by world hunger. I see the same commercials. Those little kids starving and very depressed. And I watch these things on TV and I see those commercials and I look at it and I go, God, how cruel, I see a little kid out there and I go, I know the film crew could give this kid a sandwich. The kid's not out there, filming a letter from home with a Betamax, huh? There's a director 5 feet away going, don't feed him yet! Get that sandwich out of here! It doesn't work unless he looks hungry!
Nobody is afraid where their next meal is going to come from. You fulfill that fundamental need, that fundamental desire, and you remove all fear from people as to their ability to survive with the basics. You make sure they have food, and you make sure that they have water. And he said, you're going to have a much harder time justifying going to war or controlling the masses with fear, going after the greedy whims of dictators and oligarchs. If anything, Borlaug was very much a proof to Sam Kinison's theory. And the truth is, there's enough food in the world right now to feed everybody. If people know that they have food, if they have abundance, you're going to be good.
Do you have any other important questions you would like answered? Like, why does the Torah describe God as having human-like features and qualities? Or maybe, why the Torah is unlike all other books? Well, find the answers to these and many other questions by visiting noahhighcommunity.com. Please subscribe to our channel and see more videos like this one. And thanks for joining us on another episode of Learn It by TNC. We're dedicated to making the world a better place.